Hello, everybody. Time to continue with these schedule preview prediction videos, and today we're looking at this year's Clemson Tigers. Now, this year's Clemson Tigers looks nothing like what we've seen from previous years. The era of Deshaun Watson, Trevor Lawrence, gone. Clemson hasn't been the same since those two quarterbacks. And it has a lot to do with an elephant in the room, which I'm going to explain about in just a little bit. But first, of course, we got to talk about last year. There was expectations of plenty for Clemson last year to make the 14 playoff, which they've done in quite a few years. 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020. But 2021 and 2022, Clemson did not make the playoff. However, there were expectations in 2023 that Clemson would make the playoff. Not only did Clemson not make the playoff, they didn't even come close. In fact, they didn't even come close to the ACC championship. They lost 4 games in the regular season. Now, one of them, not really any shame in losing to, Florida State. I mean, they went undefeated up until the bowl game. Many argued they should be in the playoff, but again, I've already said my thoughts on that. There's no need to beat a dead horse anymore. But there was other losses. Your other 3 losses were inexcusable. Duke in the first game of the season. How do you not only lose that game, you almost lost by 20. You lost by 3 scores in that game. Miami, they went 7-6. But yet, and they also had the most embarrassing loss of the entire season when they had that play against Georgia Tech where they fumbled when all they had to do was kneel down. And yet you lose to them. NC State, you lost to them too. There was no excuse for losing to them. This pattern of losing games that you never should have that cost you the playoff wasn't just a new to 2023 team. It's been going on since 2020. In 2021, you lost 3 games in the regular season. In 2022, you lost 2 games in the regular season, one of them being against a South Carolina team you really had no business losing to. They were pretty good that year, but still, you should have beat South Carolina in 2022. But you let them not only win, but win on your own home turf. And then in the bowl game, you go and lose to Tennessee. And then last year, you lose 4 games in the regular season. Clemson should never lose more than 2 games. You lost 4. It was also the first time in a while you did not win 10 games. It all points to one thing. There's one thing that you can blame for Clemson falling since 2020. And it's their lack of use of the transfer portal. Now, Clemson fans have been up in arms trying to defend Dabo Swinney about it. And the main thing they point to is that you cannot build a roster off a transfer portal. And that is 100% completely true. You cannot build a roster off of transfer portal players. You have to have some coherency. And you're not going to get that from transfer portal. Just ask Deion Sanders. Just ask Lincoln Riley. But you also cannot expect to always be able to fill the holes you need to in your roster with just recruits. In this day and age, if you try to do that with just recruits, there's going to be quite a few positions on the field where you're plugging with a freshman who has no idea to play college ball or some other person who doesn't know how to play college ball because they didn't get the experience. Now, Clemson did have the 10th best recruiting class this year. That's pretty good and dandy. It's going to do nothing with the holes they have to fill. Especially with the following, with 3 crucial players who have left for the NFL. Nate Wiggins, defensive back. Rook. Okay, I'm probably gonna botch both his first and his last name, but I'm gonna try here. Ruke or or I can't even pronounce it without it sounding dirty. And Will Shipley, running back. On top of that, you are also losing a few notable players to the transfer portal. And another person whose last name I'm going to botch, I've had a lot of it in this series. Andrew Mukaba, something along those lines. Toriano Pride, and Bo Collins. You also lost one of your backup quarterbacks, so if Cade Klubnik goes down or completely sucks, well, who are you going to plug it with then? And that's also another thing, too. If you would have brought in a transfer portal quarterback, maybe they don't dethrone Cade Klubnik, but you would at least have made Cade Klubnik better by bringing in some competition to fire him up. You couldn't do that. At least Nick Saban wasn't the biggest fan of the transfer portal either, but he still brought in players he needed to through the transfer portal because he realized that he had holes he needed to fill and competition he needed to bring out from his players. Jameson Williams, transfer from Ohio State, crucial to the 2021 team that made it to the national title game. Jahmyr Gibbs, crucial to the running game in 2022. Jermaine Burton, absolutely critical to the 2023 team that made the playoff. And Nick Saban still goes on the record and says he's not the biggest fan of the transfer portal, but at least he knew what he needed to do with it. Sorry about that automatic air freshener that just went off. Dabo Swinney remains in a stubborn mindset that says do not use the transfer portal. He believes it's an evil to college football. He's refused to use it at all. And we can see the holes that are popping up within Clemson because Dabo Swinney doesn't want to use the transfer portal. And I'm not saying that they would be the best team in the world by plugging in the transfer portal, but they would at least have been better over the past few years than what they have been. What if you would have brought in somebody who was better than Cade Klubnik? What if you could bring out somebody who would improve the defense? Because you had practically no defense in that game against Duke or Florida State. I hate to keep beating a dead horse with Dabo and the transfer portal, but the very fact remains that Dabo and his insistence of not using the transfer portal has cost Clemson over the years. And if he does not at least try to embrace the transfer portal, it will continue to cost Clemson in the future years until Dabo finally decides he's had enough and hangs up the boots. Another thing too, he refuses to use the NIL. Now Saban again wasn't really the biggest fan of NIL, but he at least knew what he needed to do. He got people to sign NIL. We all remember those Dr. Pepper commercials with Bryce Young that was featured in them. You don't have to like NIL. You don't have to like the transfer portal. But you at least have to realize in modern college football, you need both of them and the right use of both of them to go where you want to go in college football. Clemson's on the fast track to completely botch the handling of it, if they haven't already botched the handling of it. And I think not only this year, but in future years, if they don't get a handle on this situation, Dabo Swinney will go from being known as the coach who almost dethroned Nick Saban to the coach who completely screwed over his team in a backwards mindset. Anyway, let's move away from this talk because it's kind of getting depressing. I mean, and also too, to further prove my point, Dabo Swinney is probably the best in-game coach in college football. But his off-the-field management of the team is getting in the way of the team's success. The transfer portal, the refusal of NIL, and if he doesn't get a hold of it, like I said, he's going to go from that coach who almost dethroned Nick Saban and for a little bit was even considered the best coach in college football to just another random guy who had some success at the top but then fell. Let's get to the schedule. Clemson could not have asked for a tougher game to start off the 2024 college football season. The Georgia Bulldogs. I already said it in my Georgia preview with VicTube that I think Georgia probably dominates. Even if Dabo Swinney would be plugging up the holes in the transfer portal, it would be a very tall task to overthrow this Georgia team. But I think combined with the off-the-field stuff, with the transfer portal and the NIL stuff, I think you get dominated against Georgia to start the season. And then not to mention, it's technically neutral site, but it's in Atlanta, Georgia. Not only has Georgia been there a lot for the SEC title game, but it's in their own state. So there's going to be a lot more Georgia fans than Clemson fans at that stadium. So even though it's technically neutral site, you might as well say it's a home game for Georgia. Good news is you are going to play Appalachian State after that, and I think you should be able to handle Appalachian State. Some people have even edged in Appalachian State as possible to be the Group of Fives representative for the for the playoff debuts its new format. But even if that's the case, I don't see Appalachian State being able to beat Clemson. Okay, this is another oddly timed first bye week. I've lost count as to how many badly timed first bye weeks I've had to cover in these schedule previews. It's in the third week of the season. I would have wanted it to be a little bit further down the schedule. I'm going to get to where I would have put that first bye week in just a little bit when I get to that game. But it's in between Appalachian State and NC State. Now, I know you lost to NC State last year, but come on. Do you really need a bye week that bad before NC State? And if you do, then I'm scared as to what we're going to see from Clemson this year in a bad way. Normally when I say I'm scared to see what we're going to see from a team is because I think that team is scary bad like Georgia. Scary good like Georgia. I've never said I'm scared of a team, scared to see what the team's going to do because I think that team's going to do bad. But anyway, after that bye week, you get NC State at home. I think you beat them. I think home field advantage neutralizes NC State there. Then you play Stanford, which you've selected as your homecoming. Stanford, it's either going to be Stanford or Virginia. That's going to be the worst team in the ACC. I would say it's probably going to be Stanford. I think you dominate Stanford. So I think at that point in the season, you're 3-1, with your lone loss being in the opening week against Georgia. But unfortunately, after that, you play your toughest opponent on the schedule besides Georgia. You're on the road at Florida State. Now, I know Florida State did lose quite a few key pieces, and I'm not completely sold on DJ Uyunglele as quarterback for Florida State. But still, Florida State is going to be a good team. I've said before that I think they at least play for the ACC title game. It's going to be at Florida State. DJ Uyunglele is going to be there to prove that he should have been given another chance at Clemson instead of them throwing him to the road, like last night's dinner, I think Florida State beats Clemson. I think they knock them down to 3-2. Hold on one second. And never mind. Anyway, sorry, I thought I had to sneeze, but I didn't. And it might come out later, I don't know. But after the Florida State game, you get another road game. So back-to-back road games here. You play Wake Forest. Now, Wake Forest is probably the most inconsistent team in all of Power 5. I mean, Kentucky, maybe. But when you think of inconsistent Power 5 teams, you think of Wake Forest. Few years, it feels like just yesterday, they were playing for the ACC title against Pitt. Now we don't even regard them as good anymore. They're probably like a mid-level to mediocre ACC team is Wake Forest. I think you should be, even though this is on the road, I think you should be able to beat them. Unless you're like completely demoralized from the Florida State game. But I still think you beat Wake Forest on the road. Come home to play another team that has a case for the worst ACC team, if not Power 5 team. Virginia, I think Tony Elliott's going to be gone after this year. He's been nothing but terrible for Virginia. I think Clemson dominates Virginia. And then you get your second bye week, which comes at a better time than the first bye week. I would have probably put the first bye week right before the Florida State game. But if they would have been right before the Florida State game, then I probably would have picked Clemson to win the game. But it's the first bye week is badly timed for some reason. After that second bye week, you then come home to play Louisville. I think you get the win over Louisville. Louisville is going to be losing a lot from this year, from the last year to this year is what I meant to say. And I think you should be able to beat them. Then you play at Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech has been hyped up this year. I think it's with good reason. I think they're probably the second best ACC team. We've seen them start to have good years. And I think being on the road at Virginia Tech, I think Virginia Tech gets the win over Clemson. You get another back-to-back road game. This time at Pitt. But I don't really have a lot of confidence in Pitt this year. I think you should be able to beat Pitt. Unless, again, you're demoralized by losing to Virginia Tech. But even then, I think you should be able to get the win at Pitt. Then you come back home for your final two games of the season. First at the Citadel. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. You know Clemson's going to win that game. And then you get your in-state rival, the South Carolina Gamecocks. Shane Beamer has been a mixed bag ever since he went to South Carolina. He showed promise in his first year, and then that promise was echoed again in the second year. He even beat your Clemson Tigers in 2022, leading many people to expect great things from South Carolina in 2023, and they had a losing season. There's a lot of South Carolina fans who are discontent with Shane Beamer. I don't necessarily think Shane Beamer's on the hot seat this year, but I think the difficulty of South Carolina's schedule is going to lead to a lot of losses, which are going to put Shane Beamer on the hot seat. I think you beat South Carolina. I don't really have a lot of confidence in South Carolina this year. Like I said, their schedule is tough. And I think you should be able to get the win at South Carolina. Not to mention they're losing Spencer Rattler. So they're going to have to find another quarterback. So I think you're able to get the win over South Carolina. So there you go. I have Clemson going 9-3 this year. Could that be enough to get into the ACC title game? Maybe. It depends on how the rest of the ACC is doing. Some of you may have already seen my Florida State preview. And if you did, you realize that I have Florida State going 11-1 with the lone loss being to Notre Dame. So automatically you can guess that I'm having Florida State go to the ACC title game in my predictions. I, however, am going to make the statement that I do not think more than one ACC team is getting to the playoff this year. Out of all the Power 4 conferences, the Big 12, Big 10, SEC, ACC, the ACC is easily the weakest. At least with the Big 12, you have Oklahoma State, Kansas State. Kansas is on the rise. UCF is on the rise. You're getting Utah, who has been a long time Pac-12 powerhouse. The ACC, I can really only name Florida State as powerhouse. I also don't think Clemson gets to the playoff with a 9-3 record unless they would somehow get to the ACC title game and win it. And I think that's the only way the ACC gets two teams into the playoffs is that if Florida State goes 11-1, but then loses in the ACC title game, and then the one who won the ACC gets in, which would also mean that Florida State is now eligible as an at-large team. But other than that, I don't see the ACC getting more than one team into the playoff. Anyway, that's my prediction for the Clemson Tigers. Next one, I'm going to go ahead and do the Kansas State Wildcats. Until then, this is Roll Tide 99. I'll see y'all later.